The Ranger and the Yeti, A Nightmare in the Mountains. My name is Daniel Carter. I've been a park ranger in the Rocky Mountains for nearly 20 years. I've seen blizzards roll in without warning, watched wolves stalk prey in the dead of night, and even encountered the occasional mountain lion. I thought I had seen everything nature had to offer. I was wrong. It was mid-December when the call came through. Two hikers had gone missing near Devil's Hollow, one of the most remote areas in the park. The place was notorious for its unpredictable weather, sharp ravines, and eerie silence. Even experienced hikers tended to avoid it during the winter months. The storm had rolled in quickly. Heavy snowfall blanketed the trees, muting every sound except for the wind's low howl. The sun had set hours ago, leaving me with only my snowmobile's headlights and flashlight to guide me. I radioed in my location and set off toward the last known position of the missing hikers. It didn't take long to find the first sign that something was very wrong. The footprints in the snow weren't human. They were massive, easily twice the size of my own boots, with an elongated shape and what looked like claw marks at the tips. Whatever had made these tracks had weight behind it. Each impression sunk deep into the snow, far deeper than a person's boot would. A chill crawled up my spine, and not from the cold. I'd seen bear tracks before. These weren't from any bear. I followed the prints cautiously, my rifle slung over my shoulder. As I walked, I noticed claw marks on the nearby trees, deep gashes as if something massive had raked through the bark. The air smelled foul, a mix of damp fur and rotting meat. Then I found the first real evidence of the hikers. A torn backpack lay in the snow, one strap ripped clean off. Nearby, a flashlight flickered weakly, its beam barely piercing the darkness. Blood splattered the snow in dark patches. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Something was watching me. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line. At first I saw nothing, just the skeletal trees swaying in the wind. But then my flashlight caught something. Eyes. Two glowing orbs reflecting the light like an animal's, but they were too high, at least 8 feet off the ground. A shape loomed between the trees, its massive form blending into the shadows. It was covered in thick, matted white fur streaked with dirt and blood. It took a step forward. The ground trembled beneath its weight. I raised my rifle, heart pounding. My breath came in short gasps, fogging in the frigid air. Then it let out a sound I'll never forget, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through my chest. It wasn't the sound of any bear or wolf. It was something ancient, something primal. And then it vanished. 1 second it was there. The next it melted into the trees, moving faster than something that large had any right to. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, drowning out all other sound. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the darkness. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't the predator here. I was the prey. A sudden crack echoed through the forest, a branch snapping under something heavy. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Another sound, another snap. It was circling me. I needed to move. I adjusted my rifle, keeping it raised, and started back toward my snowmobile. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched never faded. Then a voice crackled over my radio. Help! The voice was weak, barely audible over the static. It had to be one of the missing hikers. I hesitated for only a moment before changing direction, moving toward the source of the signal. The footprints in the snow continued deeper into the forest. I followed them, flashlight beam trembling slightly. Then I found him. A man lay half buried in the snow, his face pale and frostbitten. His jacket was torn, deep claw marks slashing through the fabric. His breath came in weak gasps. I rushed to his side, dropping to my knees. Hey, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open. He tried to speak, but only a ragged whisper came out. Then his eyes widened in terror. I didn't have time to react before I felt it. A presence behind me, hot breath on the back of my neck. I turned. The Yeti was towering over me, its glowing eyes burning with something between intelligence and hunger. Its mouth hung open slightly, revealing jagged yellow teeth. I fired. The gunshot shattered the silence. The bullet struck the creature's chest, but it barely flinched. Instead, it let out a furious, deafening roar, the sound shaking the trees. The hiker screamed. I grabbed him by the arm, hauling him up. Move, I shouted. We ran. The Yeti gave chase. I could hear it behind us, massive footsteps crunching through the snow, the snapping of branches as it tore through the forest. It was faster than it should have been, covering ground at an impossible speed. The snowmobile was close. I could see it through the trees. The hiker collapsed. His legs gave out, his body too weak to continue. I turned back, grabbed him under the arms, and dragged him forward with every ounce of strength I had left. The Yeti was nearly on top of us. Then, another gunshot. I turned to see another ranger standing near the tree line, rifle raised. The shot had hit the Yeti in the shoulder, causing it to recoil. It let out a screech of rage, then retreated into the darkness. We didn't wait to see if it would come back. We got the hiker onto the snowmobile, and I gunned the engine, speeding away as fast as the machine would carry us. The Yeti didn't follow. By the time we reached the ranger station, the storm had worsened. The hiker was rushed to a hospital. He survived, but he never spoke of what happened that night. The second hiker was never found. No one believed me when I told them what we encountered. A bear attack, they said, a trick of the storm. But I know the truth. Something ancient lives in those mountains, something that watches, that hunts, and it's still out there. The beast of Frostwood Valley. My name is Lucas Monroe, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I've seen avalanches, grizzly attacks, and storms that could rip the bark off trees. But what happened in Frostwood Valley last winter still haunts me. It started with missing livestock. A local farmer reported several of his sheep missing, their pens broken open as if something had torn through them. When we found the carcasses deep in the woods, they were barely recognizable, mangled beyond what any predator in these parts could do. Claw marks shredded the surrounding trees, each gash as deep as my fingers. I didn't want to believe the stories the older rangers told, the legend of the Frostwood beast, a creature covered in matted white fur, towering over any man, with a voice like a howling wind. They said it came down from the peaks in the dead of winter when the cold was harshest. Most dismissed it as an old folk tale, a warning to keep people from wandering too far into the wilderness. Then people started disappearing. The first was a hunter named Gary Holt. He was an expert tracker, knew the mountains like the back of his hand. One day he set off before dawn, promising to bring back a deer. He never returned. We formed a search party. The fresh snowfall made tracking difficult, but we found signs. His rifle snapped in half like a twig. More of those massive footprints leading deeper into the forest, where the trees grew too thick for sunlight to penetrate. By the time we found what was left of him, the snow had already started to bury the remains. His body was torn apart, his clothes shredded. There were no signs of scavengers, no tracks leading away, except for those massive footprints. That was when I knew. The stories were true. The rangers wanted to close off the area, but some locals didn't listen. Another man, a trapper named Ellis, ignored our warnings. "I ain't scared of no damn bedtime story," he told us before heading out. We found his camp the next morning. Shredded tent, blood everywhere, no sign of Ellis. The storm hit that night. The wind screamed through the valley like something alive. The snow fell so hard that visibility dropped to nearly nothing. That was when I heard it. A deep, guttural growl, barely audible over the storm. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my rifle and stepped outside, my breath fogging in the freezing air. I saw nothing, only the swirling snow, the black silhouettes of trees swaying in the wind. Then the trees moved. No, it wasn't the trees. It was something massive, watching me from the edge of the clearing. Two glowing eyes, too high off the ground to belong to any animal I knew. I fired. The shot echoed, but the creature barely flinched. It let out a howl that shook me to my core and vanished into the storm. I barricaded myself inside, listening to the wind and the distant crunching of snow. It was out there, hunting. By dawn, it was gone. The only sign of its presence was the deep footprints leading away from my cabin. The official report said Gary and Ellis were victims of a bear attack. But I know the truth. Something ancient lurks in those mountains. Something that comes down when the snow is deep, when the cold is unforgiving, and it will return. Terror on Black Hollow Ridge. I was stationed at Black Hollow Ridge, a remote ranger outpost deep in the Appalachians. Winter was in full force, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. I had one job: monitor the area, report any signs of avalanche risk, and assist stranded hikers. I never expected to fight for my life. It began with the strange noises. Late at night, I'd hear something moving beyond the tree line. Not the normal sounds of deer or foxes. This was heavy, deliberate, breathing, watching. Then came the footprints. One morning, I stepped outside to find a set of tracks circling my cabin. They were massive, easily twice the size of my own boots. Whatever made them had walked around my cabin multiple times before vanishing into the trees. The radio crackled to life. A distress call. "This is Ethan Crowley. I'm stuck near Deadman's Hollow. Something's following me. Please, God, help me." Then silence. I grabbed my rifle, my flashlight, and my gear and set out. The storm was worsening, thick snow falling in sheets. The wind howled through the trees, but I pushed on, following Ethan's tracks. Then I found his pack, torn open, belongings scattered. The tracks ended abruptly. No sign of struggle, no blood, as if he had simply vanished. Then I felt it, a presence, heavy, watching. I turned slowly, heart pounding. My flashlight flickered, barely cutting through the thick snowfall. Then there it was, a towering figure covered in thick, tangled white fur. Its eyes glowed, reflecting the light like a predator's. Its breath came in deep, slow clouds of steam. It took a step toward me. I raised my rifle and fired. The shot rang out, but the creature barely reacted. Instead, it let out a low, rumbling growl and moved faster than I could believe. I ran. Branches snapped behind me, the heavy thudding of something massive chasing me through the trees. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. The ridge was close. I just needed to make it to the outpost. Then, the ground gave way beneath me. I tumbled down the slope, slamming into the frozen earth. My rifle flew from my hands. Pain shot through my ribs. I struggled to my feet, gasping for air. Silence. I turned slowly. The creature was gone, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I retrieved my rifle and staggered back to the outpost, barricading the door. I didn't sleep that night. The search for Ethan was called off after 3 days. No body, no tracks, just gone. They blamed the storm, said he must have fallen into a crevasse or been buried in an avalanche. But I know better. Something ancient roams these mountains, something that watches, that hunts. And it's still out there, the silent watcher of Glacier Pass. I never believed in the stories. 15 years as a park ranger had hardened me to reality, real dangers like bears, mountain lions, and hypothermia. But in the winter of 2019, Glacier Pass proved to me that some things defy explanation. It began with a missing skier. His name was Trevor Holt, an experienced backcountry adventurer. He had set out alone despite the worsening conditions, confident in his skills. When he failed to return, a search team was deployed. I found his camp first. It was unsettling. His tent was slashed open from the outside, his gear scattered as if he had left in a hurry. But there were no footprints, only his, leading away from the tent. The strangest part? They ended abruptly in the middle of a clearing. No drag marks, no signs of struggle. It was as if something had plucked him off the face of the earth. That night, back at the ranger station, I heard something. A low, guttural sound, half growl, half moan, carried by the wind. I stepped outside, my rifle in hand. Snow was falling heavily, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Then I saw them. 2 massive, glowing eyes, higher than any bear's, unblinking, watching. A massive shadow loomed just beyond the trees. I raised my rifle, my breath coming in short gasps. Then, silence. The wind stopped. The snow stopped. Everything became deathly still. Then, a single step. A deep crunch in the snow. I fired. The explosion of the shot echoed through the trees, but the thing didn't move. The eyes blinked. It was gone. By morning, Trevor was declared lost to the elements. The report said he had likely fallen into a hidden crevasse, but I know the truth. Something took him, and it's still watching. Whispers in the ice. The call came in at dusk. A snowmobiler had gone missing near Wolf Creek Canyon. I was the closest ranger, so I set out immediately, knowing that every minute counted in sub-zero temperatures. The storm was relentless. Snow battered my gear, the wind howling like a wounded animal. I followed the last known GPS coordinates, but when I arrived, all I found was his abandoned snowmobile. No tracks, no signs of struggle, nothing. Then I noticed something in the snow, a deep, unnatural indentation, like something massive had crouched there. Around it the trees bore deep scratches, far too large for any animal I knew. Then the whispering started. At first I thought it was the wind. But no, it had rhythm, intention. words I couldn't quite understand. Then the shadows shifted. A towering figure, white as the snow itself, emerged from the storm. Its eyes burned with an unnatural light, its breath steaming in the freezing air. It moved too fast for something so big, closing the distance between us in seconds. I ran. The whispering grew louder, the wind turning into voices, hundreds of them, overlapping, screaming, pleading. I stumbled, falling into the snow. When I turned, the creature was gone, but the voices remained. I never found the snowmobiler. He was written off as another casualty of the elements. But I know the truth. Something ancient sleeps beneath the ice, and sometimes it wakes.